Hello, students. Welcome to Mr. Sandwich Reads. I am, as always, Mr. Sandwich. Today, I'm going to be reading The Story of Oskar Schindler by Emma Rose. Afterwards, I've got a few questions we'll go over to just reinforce our reading. So let's check it out. All right, here we are. I am, of course, Mr. Sandwich, and we are reading The Story of Oskar Schindler. Let me just expand my screen here. Again, this is by Emma Rose. And here we go. On Oskar Schindler's gravestone in Israel, the following words are carved in Hebrew: the unforgettable life savior of 1,200 oppressed Jews. How did Schindler, a wealthy businessman and German Nazi, save the lives of so many Polish Jews during World War II? Why did Schindler decide to help the Jews? What made him choose to go against the Nazi Party? A privileged background. Oskar Schindler was born on April 28, 1908, in the small industrial town of Zwickau, to a wealthy and respected German family. Oskar's mother was a devout Catholic, but even though Oskar also was raised as a Catholic, he was not religious, and as a child he frequently played with his Jewish neighbors. Oskar's father manufactured farm equipment, and Oskar, who trained as an engineer, was expected to join the family business. Growing up, Oskar had a confident, easygoing manner. His parents' social position gave him plenty of self-assurance. He could afford to be different, break rules, and take risks. Oskar was tall, good-looking, and charming. A daredevil at heart, he enjoyed challenges and built and raced his own motorcycle. He also knew how to get along with people from any background, and he did whatever was necessary to fit in. When he began to work for his father, he wore the Nazi emblem on the lapel of his expensive suit to guarantee orders from the managers of Nazi companies. On one sales trip, Oskar met a beautiful and wealthy young woman named Emily. 6 weeks later, Oskar and Emily were married. Oskar was just 20 years old. For a short time, the couple was very happy. Then world events changed their privileged lives. Schindler the Nazi. After its defeat in World War I, Germany was in ruins. To make matters worse, the depression caused by the U.S. stock market crash in 1929 affected Europe as well. By 1935, many European companies had closed, including the Schindler family business. Adolf Hitler, Chancellor of Germany, blamed the Jews for Germany's problems. Eager for a scapegoat, the German people believed Hitler. In the 1930s, Oskar Schindler bought a company that had been owned by the Jews. To help him secure work orders for his company, he decided to join the local Nazi party. He socialized with Nazi officers and worked as a spy for Germany. From his business trips to Poland, he brought back information about Polish military preparations and supplies. Schindler's actions hurt the Jews, but at that time, he didn't seem to care. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland and World War II began. On September 6th, the German army conquered the Polish city of Krakow and set up a government there. Tanks and soldiers were everywhere. A torrent of new rules from the Nazi leaders began making life more and more difficult for Polish Jews. 2 months after the Germans invaded Poland, they ordered all Jews ages 9 and older to wear a blue and white armband with the Star of David on it. Then the Nazis built a wall around a 16-block area of Krakow and ordered all Jewish families, 17,000 people, to move into it. The Jews crammed into the 320 apartment buildings of the Krakow ghetto as loudspeakers on trucks blared, "Failure to register with housing authorities is a violation and will result in summary execution." Oskar Schindler arrived in Krakow shortly after the German army. He dined with elite and powerful Nazi officers, supplying them with gifts he obtained on the black market, where goods were bought and sold illegally. In return, the Nazis gave him control of a formerly Jewish-owned enamelware factory and a contract to produce mess kits and kitchenware for the German army. It was Schindler's chance to get rich once again, profiting from the business of war. As a factory owner, Schindler wanted to make as much money as possible, so he paid his workers very little. Schindler's accountant, a Polish Jew named Ishak Stern, suggested that Jews would work for even longer wages than the Polish laborers, so Schindler hired more Jews. Schindler's business grew from 45 workers to more than 250 as German army contracts continued to stream in. Within a few years, Schindler's small factory, known as Amalia, was a thriving enterprise, making him a millionaire. The contracts he obtained through the Nazi connections were responsible for his huge profits. Schindler became adept at working inside the corrupt and ruthless system the Nazis operated, and he learned how to use the system to his advantage. Although Schindler's Jewish workers were poorly paid, Schindler's factory offered them a haven from the brutality of daily life. The Germans had taken over their businesses, and their homes and belongings had been confiscated. Their neighbors could help them without risking execution or imprisonment. But Schindler had sufficient connection to protect his workers from Nazi abuse, and he did so in order to protect his business. A change of heart. Then things got much, much worse for the Jews. The German army told them that they would be moved to the countryside to ease the overcrowding in the Krakow ghetto. At first, the Jews believed this lie, but before long, the truth seeped out. 14,000 Krakow Jews were sent directly to a concentration camp in Belzec, where they were put to death. Others survived for a time in the nearby Plazau labor camp. Here we see a Jewish family packing their belongings, the rest of what they can carry as they are sent away. Schindler's accountant, Ishak Stern, again intervened. Horrified to learn of so many innocent deaths, he urged Schindler to hire even more Jews. Schindler agreed, before he had ignored much of the Nazis' inhuman treatment of the Jews. But as Nazi brutality escalated to murder, Schindler realized that the German army would stop at nothing short of total extermination of the Jews. Watching innocent people being forced onto trains that would take them to their death, Schindler felt something awaken in him. Beyond this day, no thinking person could fail to see what would happen, he later said. I now resolve to do everything in my power to defeat the system. He set out to save as many Jews as possible. Schindler knew he could legally hire Jews if they were deemed essential to the German war effort. So he obtained the names of the Jews who were about to be deported to concentration camps, and he falsified their records, claiming that they were essential workers. For example, Schindler persuaded the Nazi authorities that retired lawyers were actually experienced machinists, that housewives and little children were expert metal workers, and the doctors and musicians were draughtsmen. He promised his Jewish employees that if they stayed on at his factory, they would survive the war. To keep his promise, Schindler had to remain on good terms with the Nazis. He spent his money on smuggling food, clothing, and other necessities for his workers, and on bribing German officers and guards with black market goods such as chocolate, fruit, coffee, and silk stockings. Schindler also entertained the Nazis lavishly. His charm, his influential friends, and his money opened many doors and kept him out of trouble. On March 13, 1943, the Nazis sent all Jews in the Krakow ghetto to concentration camps. Schindler's essential workers, known to the Nazis as Schindler's Jews, were sent to the Plazau labor camp run by the infamously cruel Nazi officer Oman Goeth. Unlike other Jews at Plazau who were forced into hard labor, Schindler's Jews were allowed to leave the camp during the day and work in his factory. Each night they returned to the camp. When Ishak Stern became deathly ill, Schindler visited the camp and brought him medicine. Schindler was terribly upset by the horrible conditions he saw at Plazau, where prisoners were lucky to survive 4 weeks under Goeth's brutality. Schindler became determined to get his workers out of the camp. Again, using his connections, he got permission to build his own sub-camp on his factory grounds. Schindler built and operated the camp at his own expense and according to his own rules. Nazi guards were forbidden to enter the camp and abuse the workers, and Schindler spent every night in his office so that he could intervene if the Gestapo, the terroristic Nazi police, appeared on the scene. Schindler made sure that the food and the living conditions were superior to those at Plazau, and he bribed the Nazis to supply medicine. His employees certainly didn't live in luxury, but they were far better off than the Jews at the camps. saving lives. By 1944, Germany was losing World War II. The Russian army were heading toward Plaszow. The Nazis ordered the Plaszow labor camp, as well as its subcamps, to be closed as part of their final solution. We talked about that in class, which would send all Jews, including Schindler's employees, to the Auschwitz, Gross-Rosen, and Treblinka extermination camps. After hurriedly arranged meetings with high-ranking Nazi officials, Schindler got permission to move his factory to Brinlitz, a small town on the Polish-Czechoslovakian border. Schindler was allowed to make a list of essential workers to take with him as his labor force. These could include not only workers from his old factory in Plaszow, but also any Jews from Plaszow or its subcamps whom he designated as specifically suited for his workforce. When the Jews heard that Schindler was creating his list, they all prayed to be on it, but of course, not everyone could be. With the help of Itzhak Stern, Schindler finally drew up a list of more than 1,000 Jews, Schindler Juden, to be saved from the Nazi death camps. I do know, by the way, Itzhak is the Yiddish version of the name Isaac. The Jews on the Schindler's list were separated by gender and were put on 2 different trains bound for Schindler's new factory in Brinlitz. On the way to Czechoslovakia, however, the train carrying Schindler's female workers and their children were mistakenly diverted to the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camps. The terrified workers had no idea what had happened and suddenly found themselves subjected to extreme hunger and cold, torture, and the promise of imminent execution. A Schindler survivor, Anna de Klauer-Pearl, later recalled, "I knew something had gone terribly wrong. Our only hope was that Schindler would find us." When Schindler learned of the potentially fatal mix-up, he frantically pulled every string he could to save his workers. He succeeded. All 300 women and children were called by name and led to a train that would take them to Brinlitz. It marked the only time that people were released from Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp during World War II. In Schindler's new Czechoslovakian factory, conditions were still very difficult. Schindler spent all of his money on food, clothing, and medicine for his workers, as well as bribes to the Nazis to keep these necessities coming. Schindler established a secret Jewish graveyard where those who died could receive a fitting burial. Schindler's new factory was supposed to supply ammunition for the Nazis, but in the 10 months it operated, the factory never produced a single usable shell. The ammunition failed to pass military quality tests. Still, Schindler somehow persuaded the Gestapo to send 100 more Belgian, Dutch, and Hungarian Jews to his factory to help with continuing war industry production. Schindler's work often put his own life in danger. The Nazis became suspicious of him and had him arrested twice. Once, a Nazi officer told Schindler that he would not live through the war, but the Nazis' power grew weaker as the war progressed, and Schindler survived. And by the end of World War II, he had saved the lives of more than 1,200 Jews. After the war, in May 1945, the war was over. The night before the Russian army moved into Brunlitz, Schindler gathered his workers together in the factory. He told them it wasn't safe for him to remain in the country since the outside world, all of Germany's enemies, saw him as the owner of a slave labor camp. Schindler told the Jews that they were now free, but he himself was a fugitive. "My children, you are saved. Germany has lost the war," he told them. He asked the Jews not to go into neighboring houses to rob and plunder. "Prove yourself worthy of the millions of victims among you," he said, "and refrain from any individual acts of revenge and terror." Then, at 5 minutes after midnight, when he was certain that the Jews were finally out of danger, Schindler left his factory for good. "I must leave now," he told his workers. Auf Wiedersehen. Sorry, I have apologized for my Italian when reading Mulberry Street. I'll apologize for my German. Like a refugee, Schindler fled the country with his wife and 12 of the workers who were closest to him. Eventually, they traveled to South America and tried to start a new life. Unfortunately, Schindler could not adjust to life in a new country. He had been disgusted by the Nazis' actions during the war, but he still loved Germany. Soon, Schindler left his wife, his friends, and his new business to move back. He lived in Germany for the rest of his life, leaving only to visit his former workers in Israel. Schindler never regained his wealth, But his lasting reward was much more important than financial success. He was embraced by the Jews as a war hero and a friend, and invited to plant a tree at Israel Avenue of the Righteous, dedicated to Gentiles who helped Jews during the Nazi reign. Schindler's Jews presented him with a gold ring inscribed with these words: "He who saves one life, it is as if he has saved the entire world." Later in life, Schindler said that his moral transformation during the war was sparked by the shocking reality of the Nazis' final solution. He said, "I hated the brutality, the sadism, and the insanity of Nazism. I just couldn't stand by and see people destroyed. I did what I could, what I had to do, what my conscience told me to do. That's all there is to do. Really, nothing more." Oskar Schindler died in 1974. Before his death, he requested that he be buried in Israel. "My children are here," he explained. True to his wish, he was buried in the Catholic cemetery on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. His death mourned by hundreds of Schindler Jews. Some 6,000 of their descendants are alive today. For many years, the rest of the world knew little or nothing about Oskar Schindler. Although several film documentaries were made about his life, he remained famous only to the Schindler Juden and their families. Then, in October 1980, Australian novelist Thomas Keneally walked into a Beverly Hills, California luggage shop owned by Leopold Page, one of the workers on Schindler's List. While processing Keneally's credit card transaction, Page told him the entire story of Schindler's heroism. That was the genesis of Keneally's novel Schindler's List, which the director Steven Spielberg then turned into an Academy Award-winning movie. Now, Oskar Schindler is known not only to the Schindler Juden, but to people worldwide. Okay, some questions to reflect on here. What events led to Germany's troubles after World War I? That is a question we have been considering. We're going to be writing the essay here. What conditions and ideologies allowed the Holocaust to happen? So we have talked about the conditions of post-World War I Germany. The depression, inflation, along with the reparations they're expected to pay out of the Treaty of Versailles. All things to keep in mind. And people, it also had added, and this helps with the ideology part of that essay, they also add the want for scapegoat, the want to blame something or somebody, so that there's a sense of the ability to come back. They're downtrodden after World War I, Germany is, and they're looking for something to blame. When Schindler opened his factory, Itzhak Stern advised him to hire Jews. Why did Schindler agree? That one was just because Itzhak said that they'd work longer hours. So it was like it was a business decision, right? So this shows the transformation. It starts as a business transition. The empathy builds in time. And then the truth that Schindler starts to see just exactly what's happening with these Jews and what the final solution entails. But at the very beginning, it's made purely from a business standpoint. They'll work longer hours. Which of Schindler's qualities do you think was most important in helping him save 1,200 Polish Jews? I just mentioned empathy. What do you think? I mean, maybe the open-mindedness to see what was going on. There wasn't that denial that we kind of talked about. Some people believe Schindler is a hero. Others disagree. Explain your point of view. So we talked about that transition from supporting Nazi Germany to then working to save the lives of 1,200 Jews. What do you think? You that's your opinion. That is an opinion and support question there. And then compare Oskar Schindler to another historical figure you have read about. This one we could just discuss in class, but I'd be curious to know, what do you think? Can you make any comparisons with Oskar Schindler and another historical figure? All right, thanks for listening. Get these questions answered, and then I hope some of this will serve to support our essays for the conditions and ideologies that made the Holocaust possible. We have to answer that question if we're going to avoid a world of future genocides. And again, as I've been telling my students, the Holocaust was not the last genocide to take place on Earth, but any genocide is too much. So we got to answer that question: how was this made possible, and how do we avoid it in the future? All right, students, thank you for following along. Enjoy, and take it easy. Be kind. Peace.